Good afternoon, Rian Kutsia from Fortis Proactive Defense Solutions up here in Pretoria. And today I'm speaking to Ridwaan down there in Durban, Durbs by the sea. And we're going to be talking about firearm ownership and self-defense in general. Ridwaan, welcome. Thank you so much for your time. I'm glad that I finally managed to get hold of you. If you maybe just want to give the followers and the viewers a little bit of an introduction about yourself and where you fit in.
Hello, Rian. Thank you. Thank you for the welcome. Yes, I'm glad that we're finally getting a chance to do this. So I'm Ridwaan Syed. I'm based in Durban, and I'm one of the loan operator instructors. We've been going with loan operator for, I think, about 4 years now, teaching the various loan operator intakes on level 1 and level 2 down in KZN. And apart from that, I run our company, which is a training company primarily called SA Tactical Institute. And then we also import and distribute retail test tactical gear. So all types of tactical gear, which we have an online store. Yeah.
Okay. Ridwaan, firearms. How effective is a firearm when it comes to self-defense in South Africa, especially if you consider the high levels of violent crime that we suffer from?
Well, the firearm is practically one of the only effective tools that one can use against an armed attacker. So the prevalence of firearms, edge weapons, or sharp objects being used by attackers would often force a responsible armed citizen to have to defend his or her life with a commensurate tool. Example, a firearm. You know, there's no link. If I'm going to go grab a pepper spray, for example, when somebody's shooting at me, there's no link there. It's totally on two different levels. The same way you would keep a fire extinguisher in your home or in your office, not knowing if you ever would be able to use it or need to use it, or having a spare wheel in the vehicle. It's having a tool for a specific job, and when that task produces the need for you to use that particular tool, then you would defend yourself, for example, in case of the fire.
Yeah, so, and I think at the end of the day, also, you know, the person handling the firearm determines everything when it comes to effectiveness. If you wanna bypass the luck phase and move on to you know, skills and knowledge and stuff.
Absolutely, and not being the victim all the time, who's always waiting for somebody to come and save them, but being somebody who is proactive and taking that responsibility on yourself, because you know nobody's going to be there quickly enough to be able to save you. You're going to have to do it on your own anyway. So yeah,
you basically you are your own first responder, whether you like it or not. And I think in South Africa, that's even more applicable than anywhere else. Risks involved when it comes to ownership of the firearm. What are the risks, if any?
Because there will always be a risk. However, we need to look at and discuss how we can mitigate that risk or vulnerability. One should not look to a firearm as being the only defensive tool. You know, I call them defensive tools. There are other tools and associated skills that are available that one can use that all fall within the legal use of force parameters. So I believe we should spend time doing realistic scenario-based training and try not to fool ourselves by playing these games where we always win in the game or we always look good and we have this false sense of security. So it takes getting out of your comfort zone, you know, and you need to then realize and be honest with yourself in terms of development. I'm not good at this particular thing. I need to go and seek training. I need to practice. I need to buy the correct equipment, learn how to use that equipment. So yeah, there will always be risks, but the short answer is we would need to find ways to mitigate those risks if we want to be serious about defending ourselves.
You can obviously do things that, well, stuff that make me frown personally is if I see somebody walking around and instead of a shirt hanging over that firearm that he's carrying on his hip, it's wide open. I mean, that is drastically increasing your risk of something bad happening to you. I mean, that's like plastering a target on your back, isn't it?
Yeah, it defeats the whole purpose of concealed carry.
Well, exactly. Part of concealed carry is that, as far as possible, somebody actually preferably has to take a close look at you to figure out whether you're carrying a firearm or not. That's
100%.
again, that's mitigating the risk, I think, in any case.
100%.
You should obviously, because owning a firearm, specifically a firearm for a defensive purpose, is a big responsibility, and you should be preferably more mentally prepared and physically prepared and emotionally prepared for the day that you have to, heaven forbid, use that firearm to stop an attack happening against you. How prepared in these areas should you be if you have to make a split decision, a life or death decision in a split second?
Yeah, well, you mentioned physical, mental, emotional preparedness, and I want to talk about a book written by Gavin de Becker. So
Gavin de Becker.
Gavin de Becker, in his book named Just 2 Seconds, Gavin mentions or he writes that, in inverted commas, this is not the time for thinking. This is not the time for planning. This is the time for action. So Gavin writes about the attempted assassination on then US President Ronald Reagan. And he says, since the attack began and ended in less than 2 seconds, it's easy to understand how some people who were right there had no idea what happened until afterwards. Just 2 seconds and the shooting was over. So once again, practical scenario-based training, which develops your mental, your cognitive, your physical and emotional processes and behaviors for the person that's being attacked or about to be attacked. And in actual fact, in our South African law, both those phases of the attack allows one to make use of either self-defense or private defense. That the attack being imminent, whether it's already begun or about to begin. So yeah, scenario-based training would be my answer there.
Well, that brings me to my next question. What level of firearms training should you ideally do or have under the belt to ensure better effectiveness under that sort of immense pressure? And also, adding to that, what would you say in terms of regularity of training?
All right, so let's go back to a firearm owner having to go and do his proficiency training. I believe your basic proficiency training that's required for an individual to apply for a SAPS, a South African Police Service, for those that are overseas, South African Police Service Competency Certificate. I believe that training is actually well constructed. If you look at it in theory, if you look at those manuals and you read through those manuals diligently, you'll find that the subject matter in those manuals, if properly studied and followed, could result in somebody having a good understanding or level of education of the Firearms Control Act. But this is also dependent on the quality of training presented by the training provider, both in the classroom and on the shooting range. So the tools are there, but if the training provider is not using it adequately and the person attending also is not making the best possible situation for himself when he attends, in that he needs to focus, not be busy on his cell phone, ask good questions, and try to get advice on the shooting range on how he can become better, then he would not benefit. It's not going to be optimal. So that's basic training. If we talk about extreme stress that you're asking about, then I believe stress inoculation would be required in training. training needs to take place at a much higher level and a level of intensity. For example, with us, we teach a tactical skills program that runs for 6 to 7 days. We take people out of their comfort zone. And that's when we find people learn the best because they humble themselves. And we immerse
Yeah.
that person or that individual or group, because often they come from like security companies and stuff. We immerse them into the world of special tactics. We currently only provide this to duty personnel, but as a private firearm owner, it's also extremely important that one goes and seeks the level of training above the basic proficiency level so that he or she can become confident with that firearm for when the fight comes. Because it's not only about marksmanship, it's about the fight. It's about the mental attack on your body. It's about being able to fight and defend yourself and see yourself defending yourself.
Yeah, that mental, in other words, the more in-depth training you start doing, the more you become mentally prepared for such an eventuality.
Absolutely.
Because I wanted to mention that, when you talk to people or when you look at comments on social media, people are, and so many people do this, they're very quick to just say, shoot him, But as a rule of thumb, very few people, I think, are actually prepared for the fact that taking a human life can weigh very heavily on your conscience, and it's something that you have to deal with. Even the fact that in that moment you are going to use your firearm to shoot at this guy because he's busy attacking you, he's shooting at you, coming at you with a bladed weapon, whatever. And you realize, but if I pull this trigger today, I can actually kill this guy. And if you're not prepared for that, then you may hesitate, which can cause chaos for yourself. And afterwards, most people have to deal with this somehow because it's traumatic. So if you agree with that, would you say that that is also something that continuous high levels of training, as you've been discussing, can address and help you maybe overcome?
Yes, and I think it goes even past training, in that it's important as an individual, as a family, as a company, as any organization, that we be realistic about all of this. We got to be honest to ourselves and not live in a fantasy world that have an image of. We've created this world in our mind where when we press a button, somebody's going to come and save us, and that would include the study of crime statistics, understanding common crime patterns and trends within, I would say, your locality and the country on the whole. Because if you have to travel, you shouldn't only worry about what happens where you live, but you're going to have to know what's happening in other places as well in the country, internationally as well. So, for example, if criminals are using pepper spray to rob people every day of their lunchbox that are walking to work, hypothetical, you might want to be proactive and change the way you do things. You can be creative, yeah. You could plant something in your lunch, I don't know. But you got to be creative, you got to be proactive. You can't get robbed for your lunch every single day and you're hungry every single day. There comes a time when you got to stand up and say, I got to do something about this, And I mean, these happen in schools. These things, kind of situations, take place in schools every day, and something has to happen about it. Something has to take place. So let's talk about guns. If local criminals are attacking people, attacking citizens, security companies, cash in transit companies with firearms, then the reality is that there may be a loss of life or limb as a result of such an attack, correct?
Yes.
So then, more than defending ourselves, are we carrying medical equipment? Do we know how to use this medical equipment? Do I carry a concealed firearm? Like you were saying, the importance of not brandishing that firearm and using the element of surprise to your advantage. Because often the attacker uses the element of surprise. But how often do we think, hey, maybe as a defender, I could use the element of surprise to my advantage? Do we choose places, locations, and routes that are focused on minimizing our exposure to potential risks? I mean, your everyday
Mhm.
route that you use, maybe there's another route that takes you a bit longer. It's 2 kilometers longer, but it might be safer. There might be better
Yes.
lighting. There may be first responders in that region as you pass security companies and hospitals and things like that. I'd rather choose that
Yes.
kind of I mean, that's what we do in close protection. Have you spoken to people whom have experienced a near-death violent ordeal? Learning what happens to the mind, what happens to the body, and lastly, do you realize that in many of these situations, it could mean life or death, and that could be for you, your family member, or the opponent. You've got no immunity. So all in all, you got to be realistic and look at this thing holistically as well.
Yeah, that makes sense, to do it like that. And it's all about being more mentally prepared at the end of the day as well. I mean, even if you just do something like, when you drive home at night and you get to your gate and there's another car down the road from you, you see the lights, you don't know where it is. Something silly like just driving around the block just to be safe. It's part of that mental preparedness that may just mean that you miss out on becoming a hijacking victim.
100%. And not putting your head in the sand, because often when we teach women,
Yes.
we teach a program called My Mom is My Bodyguard, and we travel the
Okay.
country teaching. We travel the country teaching it, and I make them laugh when I say to them, picture yourself at the traffic light in the car, and this guy walks up to you, whether he's begging, trying to sell you something, or just trying to get your phone number. What do? Hold on to the steering wheel, and you try to ignore him and wait for the traffic light to change so you can get out of there. That's a head in the sand approach. What happened if he went down and he drew a firearm? You wouldn't even know until the firearm was in your face. So the head in the sand approach, behaving like the ostrich, does not help. It does not help. You have to be able to take in as much intelligence as possible so that you know what you got to do to defend yourself.
Yeah, I do something that I personally do is when it comes to car guards, and I'm a bit in two minds because, generally I feel that car guards do a decent job in helping to safeguard our vehicles and stuff. But I personally, when you come out with your goods and you want to put it in the car, very often they come charging up. They want to help you. I don't allow that at all.
I do the same.
Absolutely, because not because of any other reason than I don't know this guy. I mean, people pose as cops to pull armed robberies. I don't know this guy. I don't want him near me. To me, that's part of that mindset. So I would rather let him do. And I mean, odds are 90% that he's the real deal. But I prefer having him over there and not in my vicinity where something can happen.
Not in your personal
space. Not in my personal space at all. And a lot of people will say that's just that's going too far, that's silly.
Overkill.
It's overkill, it's paranoia. I feel at the end of the day, my life is worth it.
100%.
Part of that mindset.
100%.
So, alternatives, or things that can work with as a complementary part of your self-defense strategy, such as situational awareness, security upgrades at your home. Would you say stuff like that can make your eventual defense with a firearm more effective, or prevent a situation from actually happening in the first place, which is first prize, I think?
Yeah. So possibly, we spoke about mitigation and it all adds to that. But the question I often ask is, would anything other than a firearm or something that can actually stop an armed attacker, what's the guarantee that it will work? Often when we're teaching ladies, they ask us about these conducting devices like tasers and phasers and all these kind of things. And my answer is, wouldn't it be counterintuitive for me to run to my attacker. Generally, as a human being or any animal being attacked, you move away from your attacker. So what makes you believe that you're going to have the confidence to be able to overcome a primal response or reaction and take this, firstly find this device, make sure it's on, and then take it to a contact point where it's going to be effective? Never gonna happen. Never gonna happen.
No.
You know? So will it work? Maybe, maybe not. So I usually lecture and use the analogy of a toolbox, of a tactical toolbox.
Okay.
And yeah, and an example I can give you is you should be using pliers for a particular role. Let's say to pull something out of somewhere. You should be using a hammer to hammer in a nail. Yes, you could maybe use the pliers to hammer in a nail, but it's not going to be effective. You got to use the right tool for its particular purpose. And the same can be said for security measures. There's definitely a great value in having physical barriers, good lighting, CCTV cameras, having trained watchdogs on a residential property, for example. But there's certain things, for example, human intelligence and awareness, that are also of extreme value. You know, for example, getting that intelligence, knowing that your neighborhood has been targeted by a housebreaking syndicate, and now your gardener has alerted you to a suspicious vehicle or an anomaly. You can try and triangulate the information that you get together with the common occurrences that's been happening in the area, and share that information with your neighbors, you know, your CPF and your neighborhood watch and security company. So apart from physical products and things that we can fit to our houses and things like that, there's other things that we can do and look for as well.
Again, for me, it comes down to using your brain instead of just putting it in neutral and keeping it there.
Yep.
Last but not least, back to the responsibility of owning a firearm, and specifically a firearm for the purposes of potentially having to defend myself with it. You know, we tend to become a little bit glib about it because we live in that world, and a lot of, if you're in the firearms game, a lot of people you know own and carry firearms. But the fact is that it is an immense responsibility and something that you have to take very serious. Given or take, if you keep that in mind, would you still consider a firearm to be a viable choice in South Africa as a self-defense tool? And why would you say that?
So let's say we lived in a totally gun-free society. In that, in South Africa, there was no guns. Nobody owned a gun at all. So there was almost 0.5% of a chance that somebody could get a hold of a gun. What stops an attacker from using a knife to kill somebody? Oh, I mean, a hell-bent motorist.
The UK.
Exactly. Perfect example. Or a hell-bent motorist run somebody over with a vehicle. Or somebody choke somebody to death. Now, I would also ask myself, would I rather walk up to an armed attacker who has a gun or a knife and attempt to disarm him, physically disarm him, or would I prefer to shoot at him from a safer distance away with less of a chance of getting stabbed or shot? You know, we got to be practical about this. So even in that society where there are more knives than guns, it would make sense for police to carry guns. It would be ludicrous to say to the police, "Oh no, we arm you with swords, and you learn how to sword fight, and you can defend yourself against these knife-wielding attackers." You know, so we got to be practical, and we got to think that we are the good guys. Often people don't think that way. In general, we are the good guys. We need to do what we need to do and equip ourselves with whatever we need to ensure that we go home safely to our families. We are not the ones who left our homes with this intention of I'm going to go hurt somebody and take what belongs to them, you know.
True.
So when you look at the use of force in certain countries, but most importantly in South Africa, and especially for gun owners, responsible citizens may lawfully train and carry with firearms. But apart from that, we may also carry impact weapons or impact tools, edged weapons and tools, chemical weapons, for example, pepper spray or OC, and then ultimately projectile weapons, which are firearms. And if we talk about force, in my minimum force should actually be considered as necessary force. For example, if I try to verbally de-escalate a situation and my attacker is, let's say, an unarmed mixed martial arts expert, so that's the suspect. He's really good at using his body to fight. And now he starts beating down on me with his advanced level martial arts skills. Me not being a professional fighter, how would I be able to put up an adequate counter force or resistance to that attack if I did not have some sort of an equalizer, some sort of a defensive tool that I can use, you know? So obviously we got to consider the proportionality test as well, in that it's got to be proportionate. I cannot go home and fetch my R5 and come there and shoot him in fully automatic for beating me up
exactly
5 minutes or 10 minutes ago, you know, because that could be deemed, not could be, it will be deemed to be excessive force, and I'd be charged with murder because of the series of events that's taken place. But in a nutshell, therefore, it's important for us to be able to train and produce this necessary force, keeping it both legal and practical, in line with the attack. And yes, the argument can be made that, yeah, but if I'm going to use something that's proportionate, it's just going to be equal. Yes, but I said necessary force. Necessary force means that I may have to go just a level higher. Like in that situation where I spoke about the knife on knife attack. You don't expect me to take a knife, defend myself against a knife wielding attacker. But I went just a level higher by using my defensive handgun, and that should be acceptable.
That makes perfect sense to me. I've always battled with the idea of a society where law-abiding citizens are not allowed to have firearms, and even more so in a country like South Africa with our excessive levels of violent crime. I would absolutely hate the idea of knowing that I'm not allowed to have a firearm, but the criminal can have his gun. Not legally, but he will get the gun, whether he has to take it off. I saw a video just earlier today where they, I don't know if it's a real cop or if it's a criminal dressed up, but two cops stopped two, I think it was GS4 security guards, and they were talking to them, and two guys just ran up, put guns in their ribs and took their guns, dragged them out of the vehicle, and somebody drove off with the vehicle as well.
I saw that one. I saw that.
Yes, it's doing the rounds at the moment. And I mean, that's a very scary situation. But again, that comes down to there's guns. Only the people who I'm supposed to trust, but I don't always know if I do, because of all the things that go on, are allowed to carry a firearm. But me, I must just take it. I don't know. That doesn't sit well with me at all.
You know, I spend time whenever possible in the United States attending training and I've worked at 4 different law enforcement agencies over time. So I've had diverse exposure to different parts of different specializations in law enforcement. And often when I send them our crime statistics, they can't believe it. They're like, dude, you need to grab your family and make your way here. You don't deserve to live in that environment. They can't believe it that it's that bad in South Africa. In
Yeah.
last year sometime, I was in Florida in the United States, and we were sitting in a room, in a conference room, with several hundred law enforcement firearm instructors from all over the world, but mostly from
Mhm.
North America. And the topic of discussion was what we call in the police the maintenance shoot. So they call it the requalification. And there
Okay.
were representatives from different police departments from all over the United States that were complaining and ranting and venting about the fact that they only get to do their maintenance shoot once a year or once in 6 months or once a month. Oh my word, once a month. Eventually, I got so fed up, Rion, and I stood up. I said, you know what? I just need to paint a picture. I'm from South Africa, and I want to paint a picture of South Africa. Since several years now, 100 and something policemen and women have been killed on duty in South Africa. Add to that, so many that were killed off duty. And do you guys know that we in the South African police only do our maintenance shoot once every 5 years? They were flabbergasted. They were flabbergasted. They actually adjourned that session. There was no comeback.
Serious?
Every other topic or every other debate had a comeback from the panel. The panelists had nothing
Yes.
to say. And so those are
Well,
the dynamics and the uniqueness that we face in South Africa.
unfortunately.
Yeah.
But there you go. Ridwaan, that is it from me, unless you've got something else to add. Thank you so much for your time and sharing some of your wisdom with us. I really appreciate it. To the viewers, if you like the content, if it's worth your while and you find well worth in it, please remember to click that like and subscribe button. Help us grow the channel so we can reach ever more people. Ridwaan, thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of your weekend. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you, Rian. You too. Take good care. It was good chatting with you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.